As we've talked about all season, we know college football, it's a broken system. There's a facet that everyone can take issue from, whether it's scheduling to playoff berths. So we've decided to start a series called How to Fix College Football. Each week, we're going to take a look at a different aspect of the game we think could be better. Today, I thought we would take a look at the archaic bowl system. Rudy, how would you describe the current state of the bowls right now?
They're an afterthought. Let's just put it that way. Because, I mean, if you're not in the college football playoff and you're not one of those traditional former BCS bowls, so we're talking about, if for those of you who don't remember the bowl championship series that came after the poll era, we're talking about
Hmm.
four major bowls. You're talking about the Orange Bowl here in Miami, the Fiesta Bowl, which every Miami fan has PTSD of, regardless of generation. That's out in Arizona in Tempe. Well, it was in Tempe. It was at Sun Devil Stadium. Now it's being played at University of Phoenix Stadium. Either way, the Rose Bowl out
Hmm.
in California, which is an iconic venue,
The
traditionally
granddaddy.
Big Ten, right? The granddaddy of them all, as Keith Jackson used to say. Well, Nelly. And then the last one being the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. So those traditionally are the four largest bowl games, but now you really in the playoff era, you can add the Chick-fil-A Bowl, committee in
Hmm.
Atlanta that
The Peach
just
Bowl. Yep.
recently hosted the national championship in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And now, as they announced today, after the Orange Bowl committee hosts the national championship game next year, the
6.
2026 calendar year, but like the 2025 season 2026 championship game, the 2026 season 2027 championship game will be played in Las Vegas. So now you can add another, kind of major venue where the college football playoff is almost getting away from the traditional bowl
Bowls.
committees to go to their own, beautiful sites to host the national championship game. So I think as much as the non-playoff bowls are overlooked now, your traditional bowl committees for the major bowls are also going to be left out because Las Vegas is going to be doing that. If they ever hosted a national championship game for college football in Los Angeles, you better believe it's not going to be at the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
They're going to do it at SoFi. So they might give the Rose Bowl committee some, throw them a bone and say, "Hey, help us organize this and get, what together with committee and help and resources." But that venue is going to be removed from that premier college football environment. And again, we don't need to worry about having a dome in Los Angeles. Let's just say right now too, like with the exception of the disaster that has been this year, with natural disasters in terms of the fires in
Yeah.
Altadena and in Pacific Palisades, and continuously they're still going on. There was another fire that happened, I believe, earlier this week, in a different part of the hills in Sepulveda Pass. Outside of this anomaly, that's been one of the worst wildfires that hit the Los Angeles area in over a century. It's a beautiful place to play football in December and January. So
Well, it's the
why not
first
do
that's
it at the Rose Bowl?
yeah, and just to give people a little bit of a history, like what's a bowl? I don't understand what a bowl is. Where does this come from? So in the early 1900s, basically college football was a very regional sport. So you had teams out west and you had teams out east. And so the Rose Bowl, which is why they called the Granddaddy, was the first bowl to be ever played. And what that was an East Coast team coming over to play a West Coast team to see kind of who was the better program, right? And as this developed, then you had the Orange Bowl come around, the Sugar Bowl, and then the Fiesta Bowl, which are the four main bowls come around. And what they did was they just associated themselves with whatever region they were in. So you had obviously the southern regions with the Sugar Bowl and the Orange Bowl. You had obviously what we look at now as the Big 12 was originally called the WAC or the Western Athletic Conference, and
And the
you
Southwest
and the
Conference too.
Southwest Conference, which will eventually, yeah, the WAC eventually turns into the SWAC. Uh, all these things I know I'm getting a little inside college football, but to understand is there was a basically regionality, and what they wanted to do is they wanted to bring teams around to make it a more national sport. Then it was great because again, everyone was kind of independent. Now we've got a national system basically, which basically makes these bowls irrelevant. And in my opinion, there are far too many. We had 47 bowls this last year, which to me is you went from having four main ones and then every couple of years starting in like the 70s, you got to like maybe like 13, which is what was the incentive of getting to a bowl because you'd have your regular season, you'd have a poll through writers in the AP pick their national champion, and then as like a little like kind of dessert for the college football season, you would get a bowl and teams would get one more shot to play and see how they stacked up against other schools. Eventually, we got into the AP area and they started doing more, and then BCS, and now we have a 4 team and now a 12 team. They're completely irrelevant. So, and we've not only seen the irrelevancy in terms of just a saturation of the market, but we've seen now opt-outs becoming a regular occurrence each and every year to the point to where you have the shell of a team, which we saw this year in several games, where you had basically second and third stringers playing each other, which no one really wants to see, right? And so to the point, like I said, where it, you'll have like an Alabama versus Michigan, but what you really have is you have scout teams playing each other. So to me, this is where I was like, how do we make these things more relevant? How do we bring back the prestige of the bowl without having to just completely eliminate them? Because if what you're saying is true, Rudy, and they still stick with the Las Vegas championship and things like that, and even possibility of moving to LA, having a championship, you're going to make them literally irrelevant. There will be no point of having a bowl anymore. Because again, when you looked even at the stadium, you can go look at screenshots. Half the stadiums were empty. So it's not like people are going to these things anymore like they used to. So, my idea to fix the bowl system would be to move the bowls to the beginning of each season. You would use the bowls to build excitement and anticipation for the upcoming season. You can keep them conference aligned to create more competition. So, the Orange Bowl would still be associated with the SEC. I mean, the ACC and the SEC and Big Ten. You would have, the Rose Bowl be your Big Ten, and I mean, if the Pac Tupac can resurrect itself, you bring them into it. But basically, I would structure the bowls to have each team be uh, basically have the bowls structured in a way that the teams would be playing it, the teams that would be playing in it would be structured based on their standing in each conference. So, for example, the Orange Bowl has a tie with the ACC and the SEC and or the Big Ten, depending on where they want to go. The SEC championship has the act technically the allegiance to go to the Sugar Bowl, but they could play in an SEC team could play in the Orange Bowl as well. But what I would do is I would have the highest ranked ACC team play the highest or second highest ranked team in whatever opposing conference, and then we would go down the line. And then you would take each conference for whatever bowl. I think we need to get rid of the 47, but what you do is you would create this, okay, one versus one, one versus two, two versus one, whatever you want to be, two versus three. Essentially, what you would have is as you would go down, you would have the four versus, you would not be playing the number 4 team in the SEC playing the number 10 team in the ACC. And what you would do is you would not only build an excitement, you would base it on the former season also. That's the other thing. So each year, the bowl is based on your record of the season. So we would take this 2024 season and bring it into the 2025 season. So whatever your record was in 2024, it would place you in the bowl for 2025. You would play an equal standing team, and think about it. You would bring revenue to wherever these bowls are being held because people would be super excited. It would give people a last chance to go, travel with their family, go see a game. You could even, this was another stipulation I wanted to put on it. You could even make it an exhibition. A lot of teams and a lot of coaches, that's how they treat this. They treat it like an exhibition game. They'll maybe only start for their starters for half a game and then take them out. You can still play your starters the whole game, but you don't make it consequential in this season. Now, you can make it consequential when it relates to AP ranking, which we're going to talk about in another week of a ranking and how we can change rankings. But what you could do is you would have a better litmus test of seeing, okay, the number one ACC school versus the number one SEC school or number two SEC school. Okay, well, now we see where they're really at, right? And as you go down the bowls, because you'll have 20, 30 bowls, every team would be that's bowl eligible would have a bowl. They could play in a week 0, or you can make it week 1. We can eliminate these boring FCS games that happen at the beginning of every season. And you could really build this anticipation where the bowls not only will get, because think about it. When you get to the end of the season with the bowl, you get these half-packed stadiums. Why? Because there's not a lot of intrigue. Their teams aren't playing for championships. Their teams weren't ranked high. Guess what? At the beginning of the season, you have none of that. You have all the excitement. Everyone's going to want to go, and you're going to have that. Think about it. We're playing Notre Dame in our first game. Imagine if that was the Peach Bowl. Like, playing Notre Dame's awesome as it is, but now we're playing in the Peach Bowl at the beginning of the season. What do you think of my idea, Rudy?
I like it for a few reasons. And I really like it because part of the history lesson that you gave in terms of the Bulls and where they came about is 100% accurate, but there's a couple of extra details that I think is really great for what your argument is. And it's that the original Bull committees, we talked about this where, like, for example, if they were to host a championship game in LA, they would let the Rose Bowl committee help them in terms of resources and stuff. When they started putting together these bowl games, the committees operated as like de facto tourism boards for these
Mhm.
different towns. So if you look at the Orange Bowl committee, for example, in Miami, they predate the Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau. Back then the records didn't really matter as much in college football. Like, you still needed to have a winning season to go to a bowl, but
Yeah.
it was the reward at the end of the season for this, college program that plays in a landlocked state that is suffering in the winter time to come down to South Florida or to go to Southern California or to go to the desert or even the Cotton Bowl, for example, in Texas, to
Yep.
go down somewhere south and warm and have a vacation for everybody. So by moving the bowl games to the beginning of the year, you actually solve two problems. You're giving the Convention and Visitors Bureau, the bowl committee, an impetus to bring people in for travel because that's going to be around the Labor Day holiday or right before that. So kids are still off at summer vacation. In some cases, it might be a nice way to like send off their kid to college by going to their new future school's first game in terms of bringing them down for like one last hurrah vacation, the summer vacation, summer of the endless summer essentially of that
Yeah.
that mentality people love to talk about. Um, Also, you're helping out all of your different local community and businesses because when you move a bowl game into the winter months, into December and January, if you're playing in a really highly desirable bowl game in one of these areas like Florida, for example, or California, that's peak season for tourism. So they're not struggling for hotel occupancy. They're not
Yep.
struggling for inventory at all. As a matter of fact, it's the most expensive pricing of the year to go to these places. So if you're a college football fan, you're thinking you have to shell out top dollar to go to multiple games, playoff games in somebody else's backyard. Most likely, you're not likely going to be playing the first round at home if you're traveling for some of these. And then you have to do it again for a playoff game at one bowl, which is your quarterfinal, then again for a championship game. So you're shelling out peak season pricing multiple times. You're not going to get
Yep.
fans to go to every single one of those. So your later games essentially become a Super Bowl where the only people that can go to it are league officials, sponsors, and VIPs and
Yeah.
major donors. So unless you're T Boone Pickens, if he's still alive, who contributed to like half the Big 12, they're the only guys that can afford to do that. Or Phil Knight, who could buy half the stadium, just lay out in. So you're helping them out too by getting occupancy in what is usually an off season. The only thing you have to worry about is weather conditions because it's the middle of hurricane season. Yes, it's ungodly hot, but you know what? Move it to a night game. There won't be as many games
Yeah.
that you're competing with, so play it at night. It's still going to
Yeah.
be hot, yes, but coaches should love it because that's conditioning for their players to do, to play in that time of the night. And like you said before, if you want to make it a week zero and make it an effective college football preseason, that's great. You can use those results in other ways. And all the coaches know what they have. They know what to
Yeah.
work with. So I think it's kind of a win-win in that regard. So all for it. I mean, for most teams, like, okay, do players lose out the chance of like finishing on one thing? Yeah, but that's what makes the regular season even more compelling in that way. And most
Yep.
players are opting out if they're not going to be continuing the next year anyway. So that's a great way to debut your young talent to say, you got a rookie, you got to transfer that first game to do it. Great. And also, one final piece on this. As you mentioned, a lot of the week one games already are basically bowl games because if you look at the Chick-fil-A college football kickoff game,
I
which
was
now,
just gonna bring that up.
yeah, between that one or like there's a couple that are also
There's a
done
Las
in Jerry
Vegas one
World.
too.
Right, there's one in Las Vegas, there's one in Jerry World, which isn't Chick-fil-A branded, but it's like, I forget what the company is behind that one that do it. There's a few
Yeah.
companies that do it now. Those are also done by the bowl committees. So the
Yeah.
Chick-fil-A kickoff game is a Peach Bowl committee sanctioned game. The one in Jerry World is a, Cotton Bowl sanctioned game in partnership with, Jerry Jones and the Cowboys, or the one in Las Vegas is a Las Vegas Bowl sanctioned game. So they're already doing it. Just bring it back to the preseason.
Yeah, and I think you really kind of you create for the player himself like, this is a great introduction. Like, you're starting your season off, like, just think about how hype. I mean, would you rather play Samford week 1 or would you rather play Alabama? You know what I mean? Like, it to me, it writes itself. It's literally, I can't think of, especially if you approach it, like I said, as an exhibition game, you don't make it count. Because again, the bowl game doesn't count at the end of the season. Like, no one looks at the bowl game. No one's going to look at this year's bowl games and go, okay, well, we're going to use that to determine next year. No one ever does that. And it
Yep.
plays zero factor. So if you just move it to the beginning of the season, you now are creating a relevance because you're now bringing teams that, again, that's why I made the stipulation also. It goes on the conference standings from the year prior. So let's say, like Ohio State, well, again, we're going to take playoffs out, but Ohio State, I think, finished second in the Big Ten, right? So you have Oregon. So the Oregon would play, let's just say, I don't know, they're going to be in the Rose Bowl, right? Because they're in the Big Ten. Oregon would maybe play, and they would used to play a Pac-12. Let's give them a Big 12 team. They would play the number one team in the Big 12, which I believe was Arizona State. So you have Oregon versus Arizona State in the Rose Bowl. Like week 0, week 1, who doesn't want to see that? You know what I mean? As opposed to Oregon playing like Eastern Washington. You know what I mean? Like no one wants to watch it. Sorry, Eastern Washington fans, but no one wants to watch that. You know what I mean? And then again, like you said, I think it's a great way. Also, if you look at it too, like maybe some of these families aren't able to travel, but there's a bowl game that's within driving distance, right? And so they maybe may not be able to get to one of their kids' games or their first game, but they can get to that bowl game because it's, hey, my son's going to play at, let's just use the University of Wisconsin. Okay, well, Miami and Wisconsin are playing each other in the Orange Bowl. Well, guess what? My son, Xavier Lucas, who's going to Wisconsin, I can't go watch him play there, but he's playing in the Orange Bowl in week 0. I can go watch that game. Super easy for families. You know what I mean? I
Yep.
think, and I think also you alluded to the second thing. Um, I grew up in the hospitality industry, worked in the hospitality industry. The number one week of the year, the most expensive week of the year is New Year's Eve. Between Christmas, the day after Christmas to New Year's Eve is the most expensive. Any hotel you go to, Motel 6, Holiday Inn, the most expensive time is going to be that week. You remove that. You get them in right before Labor Day. You get them in right as they goes in. Easy for people to take time off because it is Labor Day. Bam, it's done. I can't see any cons with it.
Here's another thing that's also zero con into that. The bowl committees get to fully brand their game again.
Oh yeah.
They can still help with the college football playoff. They can still use their venues for the college football playoff when the end of the regular season happens. But the Sugar Bowl can back to being the Sugar Bowl again. The Orange Bowl can be the Orange Bowl again. The Rose Bowl can be the Rose Bowl again. If you watch those games, yeah, there was some signage like the Rose Bowl had, the iconic logo on the 50, but outside of that 50-yard line, every other piece of branding said college football playoff, quarterfinal or college football game semifinal at the Rose Bowl. The
Yeah.
Rose Bowl was buried underneath that. You're
And
going to
what's
see
what's
it
what's
this
what's weird to me too is, and this is what I was when we were going into this, and this was my trepidation with keeping the Bulls in the college football playoff, was I'm like, wait a minute. So if you go through the CFP and win, you'll be the Cotton Bowl champion, the Sugar Bowl champion, the
Yep,
Rose Bowl champion, and the
you're
national
collecting the
championship. It's
rings
like
like Thanos.
you're Thanos. Exactly. I'm like, get away with that because you're diluting. You're immediately diluting the value, and you're right. Like, and I think again, we're going to talk about this how we would fix the playoffs, but here's a little sneak peek. Just make the playoffs like the NFL, like up until the championship game, higher ranked team gets that home field advantage. Think of the revenue you're going to bring in to these college towns. You know what I mean? Like, trust me, I think Tuscaloosa, trust me, but in December, they're not seeing any money. You know what I mean? I guarantee you those hundreds of millions of dollars they would be getting to have their Crimson Tide hosting, 2 or 3 playoff games if they're ranked high enough. They'll love that. And I don't think anyone's going to have an issue with that in Tuscaloosa or in Ann Arbor or in Columbus. we in Miami, we're spoiled. It's like we have 1,000 other things to do, but there's a lot of college towns where there's nothing to do. Those towns literally, for a lack of better terms, die as soon as economically, as soon as the college football season is over, and they're just waiting till August comes around the following year. So I think this, like I said, it's a win-win. To me, it's simple. Make this happen. I'm not going to charge anyone for this. All I want is a lifetime supply to go to any of these bowl games once they make this happen. And so let's just make it happen for the love of God.
Don't charge anyone a flat fee, but, a small 2% royalty won't would help a
Or
lot.
or or at least, just give us a set at each of these bowl games that we can host this show from. I would love that as well. Listen, I'm not gonna and an
A
all expense
podcast
paid trip
route.
as well. Yeah, exactly. A little pod. We don't need just a little corner, just a little corner, a little something. Anything, Rudy, we wanna talk about before